The case of Irene Adler, also known as A Scandal in Bohemia, is one of the most famous cases that Sherlock Holmes ever tackled. It all began when the King of Bohemia approached Holmes, asking for his help in retrieving a compromising photograph that had been taken of him and Irene Adler, a former opera singer with whom he had had an affair. The king was engaged to be married to a wealthy princess, and he feared that if the photograph fell into her hands, she would call off the wedding, bringing shame and scandal upon him and his country. The photograph was reportedly being kept in Adler's possession, and the king had tried unsuccessfully to retrieve it himself. Holmes accepted the case and immediately began to gather information about Adler. He learned that she was a highly intelligent and independent woman who had a reputation for being able to outwit even the most skilled detectives. Despite this, Holmes was determined to solve the case and recover the photograph. Holmes and his trusted companion, Dr. John Watson, began to conduct surveillance on Adler's home, hoping to catch her off guard and obtain the photograph. However, Adler was always one step ahead of them, and Holmes soon realized that she had anticipated his every move. Despite this setback, Holmes was undeterred, and he devised a new plan. He disguised himself as a clergyman and went to Adler's home, pretending to be injured and seeking medical assistance. Adler took pity on him and allowed him into her home, where he was able to gather valuable information about the photograph's location. Holmes and Watson then embarked on a daring plan to steal the photograph from Adler's home while she was distracted by a fake fire alarm. Despite Adler's best efforts to stop them, Holmes and Watson were able to obtain the photograph and return it to the king, saving him from scandal and embarrassment. Adler herself managed to escape, however, leaving behind only a note for Holmes thanking him for his chivalry and for sparing her from further humiliation. Holmes was impressed by Adler's intelligence and resourcefulness and regarded her as one of the few individuals who had ever truly challenged him. The case of Irene Adler remains one of the most famous and intriguing of all the cases that Sherlock Holmes ever undertook, and Adler herself has become a legendary figure in detective fiction.
One of the most complex and challenging cases in the history of detective work is the case of the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The killer is believed to have murdered at least 5 people, but he claimed to have killed as many as 37 victims. The Zodiac Killer taunted law enforcement and the public with cryptic letters that contained coded messages, which he claimed would reveal his identity. He also sent letters to newspapers, claiming responsibility for his murders and threatening to kill more people if his letters were not published. Despite an extensive investigation, law enforcement was unable to identify the Zodiac Killer or bring him to justice. The killer's ability to evade capture and his use of codes and ciphers made him one of the most elusive criminals in history. The case generated a great deal of public interest and speculation, with many people offering theories about the killer's identity and motivations. Over the years, a number of suspects have been identified and investigated, but none of them have been definitively linked to the crimes. Despite the lack of resolution, the case of the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most fascinating and enduring mysteries in the annals of detective work. It has inspired countless books, movies, and TV shows, and it continues to captivate the public's imagination more than 50 years after the first murders were committed.